Welcome to this week's episode of the Liberty Unveiled podcast, formerly the Yeshua Unveiled podcast. I am your host, Brad Hopp, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Pastor Sam Jones. Together, we are unveiling liberty one episode at a time. We'll be discussing the latest in trafficking news, insider stories from those being delivered, and studying the Founders Bible to learn how to return America to sanity and true freedom. Our sponsor for today's show is Teshua Tea Company. Visit teshuatea.com or deliverancetea.com. Hi, and welcome to the Liberty Unveiled podcast. I'm your host, Brad Hopp. As you can tell, my friend Pastor Sam Jones was able to be here this week, so we're going to kind of continue on where I left off last week. We talked about slavery, and we had gone through and talked about Jamestown, finished out talking about Jamestown, and actually I had told you privately, I guess, a story about my probable future son-in-law. It's his to screw up, I guess you might say, at this point. So about how he's actually related to Richard Pace, who was one of the not like the first group that came over that founded Jamestown, but he was one of the very, very, very early. I think I'm still trying to figure out whether he got over here in 1615 or 1618. But anyway, he was one of the first.
And how much are you charging him for a dowry?
I'm like, one of my things is, I'm actually, that brings up an interesting topic of conversation, and maybe we'll discuss that a little bit today, because, no, I'm not charging him a dowry, but I am,
well, but if somebody starts bidding, you might have to. I
might have to. He
listens to the podcast, so I figured that'd be fun to really see if we can make him blush.
Yeah, and he does. And his grandpa and I had a conversation last night, and I said, I know he thinks I'm picking on him, and then I have a stronger standard for him than I did my own son. But I raised my son, and my son is the head of the household in his family. And my potential future son-in-law is going to be the head of the household in his family. But I also know my daughter. Mm-hmm. And my daughter is the one that...
Now we're going to make her blush.
She's strong spiritually. She is strong. She's a strong young lady. And it would be, if he was not ready to be the leader... And he's working on it. He's doing what he needs to do, but it's one of those time things where I want to see, give it time a little bit. But she would be inclined to. I know her well enough. She would be inclined to take over because she had to put up with her older brother, and when we have this video when they were 2 and or 2.5 in a year, I think, or somewhere like that, whatever. She's sitting in the laundry basket, and he's telling her to get out. And they start this. Mom's videotaping it because they're being cute, And then all of a sudden they start this fight, and Julius is demanding that Faith gets out, and Faith looks at him and goes, "Ah!" and just yells. So she's not one to be bullied, so I just know my daughter well enough that you need to be a strong leader in order to... She'll follow. She's more than willing to follow and stuff, but
she only follows leaders, and so that's a key, because
it really is.
Some people will follow people who don't move,
mm-hmm.
who don't lead, who mm-hmm. just sit there, and I'm not picking on on him. I don't know if you want to say his name or not, but because I've been impressed in the few times that I've met him and,
mm-hmm.
and things like that. So
he's a good young man. He really is, and that's why he's made it this far. Because I'm picky. I am very picky about who my kids marry, and
good.
Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, but I was just going to say, but I mean, it is important, because there are some people who they will follow somebody to the couch to sit down and do nothing, but there are some people who are willingly submissive, but only to people who are going to lead and lead mm-hmm. rightly, and that's really what we should desire from all of our young ladies, is that they would follow only those who are leading in godly ways, mm-hmm. and follow mm-hmm. only people who are leading. You can't really follow somebody who's not. That's just called complicit complacency.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why this young man has made it as far as he has, because he's he is. I do see, you know, the willingness to get out there and work. I do see a heart for ministry. I do see, you know, a servant's heart, and I do see that he's a young man of character. But like I said, there's some growth time that I do want to see too at the same time, and you know, like I said, I just know my daughter, and it's interesting because this is kind of completely off subject.
This wasn't at all what we just said like 2 minutes ago. We were saying where we're going to go with this. And
yeah,
this isn't at all where we said we were going to go. But.
Yeah, but I do think it's important because it's, you know, we live in such a day and age where fathers don't lead. Fathers are complicit in their leadership of the households and stuff, and if we're going to have a chance of restoring America, we really have to restore fatherhood. And we really have to restore the leadership in the household. Now, is it a patriarchal mindset? Yes. Is it a authoritarian, dictatorship, tyrannical type mindset? No, not at all. You can be patriarchal and still be kind about it.
Well, every time I pray to a patriarchy, or our Father who art in heaven, you know, and I don't think that God is anything but kind.
Right.
Now, his kindness isn't a lawless kindness.
Right.
And because he's not, his kindness is real kindness too. And I think this is important to realize. God's law is what's best for us, and you know we're in Exodus, and I'm excited to see this here: escape from tyranny. You know, the true escape from tyranny. What we're going to look at is running to God's shelter, and yet it is a patriarchy, and these two things are not contrary to one another.
Right.
And I think that's almost, I mean, in the same vein of the other passage that I think we're going to go and look at.
We're going to get to, and it's funny how this all just tied together. So, real briefly, before we get down to this rabbit trail that we're going to head down here, I do want to, just for those of you that have not been introduced to Liberty Unveiled, Teshua Tea Company, so on and so forth, I do want to kind of catch you up real briefly to speed here. So, Liberty Unveiled is the podcasting arm of Teshua Tea Company, and Teshua Tea Company is the website arm, the sales arm of Teshua House. And my partner Andrew, my business partner Andrew, is a missionary in Communist Asia, and he and the team have been rescuing underage girls out of sex trafficking over there, getting them into our rescue and rehab facility, meeting all their medical, physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, needs, giving them counseling that they need, teaching them work crafts and skills like making bracelets, making coasters, how to harvest and process tea and coffee, and do this different kind of things. And then what Andrew and I do is we come alongside the girls and we buy those products from them so that they have economic empowerment while they're under our care, and then we're bringing those products stateside and selling them over here, and then half our profits and 100% of our donations are going back to the rescue facility. Something that I don't know, maybe you've seen Andrew's post lately or whatever, but
I don't think I've seen an Andrew post lately, so I'm probably going to be in the lurch on this one.
Yeah, so I talked about it on last week's podcast, but right now we're in the process of trying to find or hoping to rent a facility, a second facility, because right now we have 41 girls and 2 female staff living in a 2,300 square foot house.
Now just stop thinking about this. 41 girls saved from sex trafficking.
Yeah, and that's only the ones that are actually in our house right now. We had a hand in rescuing another 20 or 22, so
I mean that's over 60. What's your Folgers doing for you?
Yeah.
What's your Lipton tea doing for you? It ain't doing that. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and so. We're going to be trying the Feather Mountain Black. I think we've tried this in the past. Perhaps. But anyway, so today this is the Feather Mountain Black, and you can see that was probably a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes deep. I don't know. It wasn't very long, but...
Yeah, probably about 2 minutes deep.
Yeah. So,
Now, what? Tell us a little bit about this tea here.
this is the Pu'er Maofeng. It's is the proper name of it. It's Feather Mountain is the translated name, and it is just a black tea, high mountain elevation grown. And that's the thing with all of our teas is they're all high mountain elevation grown. And what that means is a lot of people may not understand that with your coffees and with your tea, the higher elevation that they're grown at, the better they are. For one, the less pest pressure they have on them, so you don't need all the chemicals and the sprays and all that stuff on there, because the sprays and the chemicals are all expensive.
Now, this is a like just from the taste wise here. Okay, I drink a lot of tea. So if you haven't listened to the podcast before,
He's our resident tea snob.
Yeah. My nose gets a little bit higher when we talk about tea, and this is a very, very, very clean black tea. So when you think of black tea, a lot of times you think of, I mean, it's good. That's the most common kind of tea. But when people tell me they don't like tea, I immediately think, yeah, you've probably only had tea that tastes dirty, like dirty water, and they're like, yeah, that's how I think of tea. I'm like, yeah, because you haven't had good tea. This is a very, very, very clean black tea. I'm much more of a white tea preference kind of a guy, much more of a white tea, green tea preference kind of a guy. And it's because even when you talk about black tea, it has to be really high quality. Otherwise, your mouth just tastes dirty. You don't get that at all from this tea. It's very clean tea,
Right.
very good quality tea. This is how much of a tea guy I am, okay? We got to get you connected with this this tea shop too. I don't remember the name of it. My wife knows the name of it. But when we were on vacation, we decided, what are we going to do on vacation? Well, we're going to we're going to make sure we find a tea shop. So we found a tea shop in Kansas City. If I could remember the name of it, it's an Asian type tea name. So one of those.
Yeah.
Kung Fu tea or something.
It's a little more difficult.
And we went there though, and oh my goodness, wonderful little tea shop. They specialize in white teas, and so I think it'd be really good. In fact, I snapped you a picture of a tea cake, and I said maybe you got yours underpriced.
Yeah, because I think it was like close to $1,000, wasn't it, or $500?
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was $350 for. We're
it
talking
was
about a small
$350.
tea cake.
It was a small one.
I mean, it wasn't as big as
The one that we have?
the one that you have.
Okay.
And I think it was just an aged white tea is the one I sent you. I've had their aged white tea. Very good tea. I'm not bashing the tea. Tissues is better.
Really?
It's not 500-year-old tea tree. Okay. And this, I like to say, I'm a tea snob, specifically a white tea snob. Okay. Now I will say I fell in love there though. They have a white chai tea.
Oh, really?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it was just like I died and went to heaven. I mean, but as we're walking out of the store, the second time we visited it, we noticed, we missed it the first time, they had a verse
Really?
hanging in their wall. And so I looked at Sarah and I said, I got to go back in. I said, are you guys Christians? Is this a Christian company? And they said, well, we're not a Christian company per se. Our goal isn't Christianity. We're a company. He goes, but the owner's a Christian, and the two guys who are working, they go, and we're Christians. So we're Christians who are a tea shop, which is very much like the company that my wife works for. And I just start telling them about that, tell them, hey, I'm a pastor. Really want to thank you guys for your verse there. Thank you for this. But this isn't a advertisement for them.
Right.
This is here to say this is really good black tea.
Good.
So and also the white tea, and they're a specialty white tea shop. That's like their thing. That's what they kind of talk about. The white tea at Teshua is better than the specialty tea white tea shop. And I'm not just I'm not just
That's
like
cool.
saying it. I'm being honest here. I sat there, I drank it, and I looked at Sarah. I said, "Wow, this is really good white tea." I said, "Not quite as good as the 500-year-old tea tree, though."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's cool. So going back to what we were talking about, so the tea purchases and stuff, the tea and the coffee and all that stuff, half the profits go back to helping us be able to rescue more girls. Well, one of the things that we were talking about here, so back like, I want to say like late June, early July, somewhere in there, I think somewhere around Independence Day, we had a brothel and a surrender 13 more girls to us, which brought us up to the 41. But we had we have a underground church there in Asia that is has donated. It was planted 3 years ago, and they donated $2,950 to living room furniture for the new house. And there was a Christian businessman there in Asia who donated $2,530 for the kitchen and dining room necessities for the new house. And then I got word. I sit on the board for a ministry down in Texas, and the pastor really is a big supporter of Teshua and what we're doing, and is always buying products and stuff. And he's like, well, we have $2,500 that we would like to donate. Should I send it through or buy product with it? And as much as that would go to helping, us, me not have to pay some of the bills on Teshua, I'm like, no, I want you to send that all direct to Andrew so that we can get that into the rescue mission and stuff. And so just go ahead and do that. And so we're close to being able to rent the new facility and stuff. And it's expensive. I mean, it costs us $20,000. Right now, it's over $21,000 a month that it costs us to care for all the girls and stuff.
Well, I mean, think about it. You're talking now 60.
Yeah, well, 41 in the house.
41 in the house. I mean, think about what it costs to take care of 41 people.
Yeah, it's expensive.
And I mean, my wife and I just recently adopted our son, and in the end of February 28th. The first child, you start to learn.
Bills go up.
Man.
My wife.
I didn't know a guy that small could eat that much food.
My wife and I calculated it up one time when tea kettle at least once in a while if I overfill it. We calculated it up one time with our children from raising 6 kids from birth to 18 years old. I'm like, $1 million would have been really helpful. Somebody, like, doggone it, these kids are expensive. I mean, it was like $900 and some thousand that it was gonna, it's gonna.
And that's before inflation.
Yeah, that's before inflation and stuff, and so it's expensive to raise kids, but you know what? Really, the eternal value of them is incalculable. So it's worth it. And that goes back to what we were talking about, because Megan and I have spent so many years preparing and teaching and training and developing these children. I'm not just going to hand them off to just anybody.
Right. And
really that goes back to what we're talking about here on some of the stuff that we'll get into today. Like, I remember when it broke Julius's heart, there was this cute little blonde that he kind of had a thing for when he was younger. And we were sitting there at a homeschool event. She's a homeschool kid, and she's active in homeschooling and all this stuff, or extracurricular homeschool activities like choir and drama and whatever. And
cup stacking, all kinds of different homeschool activities.
Yeah. and so my kids are cup stacking champions. I will just say that,
Spelling bee, all kinds of stuff.
I don't know about spelling bee, but
I was homeschooled. That's why I make fun of it. So.
Yeah, we can get away with it. So anyway, it's funny because the kids, if they do something wrong, well, it's because I was homeschooled. And if they do something right, well, it's because I was homeschooled.
Yep.
It's always a reason for everything. But it's interesting because as the father of the house, when you're really walking with God and you're really working to instill and teach and train the children and stuff, it's interesting what he'll do and how he will equip and prepare the father to guard and protect and to establish the children and stuff. And so we're sitting at this choir concert, whatever. I think it was a choir concert, or maybe it was a drama or whatever. And I said, so which one is she? And Julius pointed her out to me, and I said, She's not the one. And I just knew right away. I was like, she's not the one. And he's like, crap. He was really bummed about it. But then his wife came along years later, several years later, and I'm like, this one's the one. She's going to be a right fit. She's going to be a good fit. And as I said, the difference is between the first scenario and the second scenario, between my son and my daughter, is I've raised both of them, and I know how he was raised to be the head of the household. She was raised to be a strong, godly woman that is, going to be a fantastic helpmeet and a great encouragement to her husband and stuff. But at the same time, because she's so strong, that means that he's got to be a man of character and integrity and a spiritual leader and stuff in the household. And I was joking with his grandpa last night. I'm like, I feel sorry for any boy that marries a hop girl, because they're they're gonna have their hands full and stuff but that really goes to what is Father God's heart for our families, and it really goes to establishing the next generation and leaving a legacy of strong Christian godly leaders that are, and I'm not saying our kids are perfect, don't get me wrong here,
Are you saying you've had to spank them a time or two?
Oh, many times. And Julius was as wonderful as Julius is, he being a command man, being a leader, he was a difficult child to raise.
Well,
very much so. Very much so.
Takes one to know one. I like to, growing up, I like to do this thing called have the last word. Even when I knew I shouldn't have had the last word.
That was Julius.
And so I got this thing called smack in the face a couple times. And rightly so.
Yeah.
And I praise the Lord for that. I thank God for that.
Julius has developed into a fine young godly leader and stuff, and he and his wife have had things that they had to work through. He was not always the nicest to her when they were first married and stuff, and so he that bull in the china shop didn't get him very far in the new marriage, and so he had to temper it and learn, okay, I need to be nicer. And he got called on the carpet a few times for it. So, I'm not expecting perfection out of him. That's not at all what I'm
expecting. Exodus 18:21, right?
That they be a godly leader, that they and that they know how to admit when they screw it up, that they know how to admit their fault, and they are willing to change and adapt and move on and stuff and so it really goes to like I said, just establishing the legacy. And I've been able to watch Julius with his kids now, and he's a good dad, he's a good father, and they're being taught and trained in the way that they need to go and stuff. But Julius got his sister out of more trouble than you could ever shake a stick at, because he, in his mind, I was not executing her enough. He wanted to see her drawn and quartered. He wanted to see, and in his mind, I was not, and I was firm on her, but he wanted to see her lynched or drawn and quartered in the guillotine or whatever, and so then he would butt his nose in, and he would get himself in trouble, and she would get out of it, and I'm like, if you'd stop sticking your nose in, I could deal with her. But they grow up and they learn and they change and stuff, and so I'm not expecting perfection from my future son-in-law. I know he's going to have things to grow into, but there's some things that financially and other things that I want to see them established on, so that if they're called into ministry, and this is the thing, as a father, I've got 28 years of life experience on them, or 26 years on my daughter, and 27 on my potential son-in-law and stuff, and so there's some things that I have the ability of seeing as an outside force. I've got some things that I could see, and I can go, no, you need to make some adjustments here, because I want you. There's nobody that loves my daughter more than me, and I haven't given her away yet, so she's still my responsibility, and she's still under my covering for now, even though my potential son-in-law is establishing himself and stuff, and he, they haven't left in, leave. They haven't, the Bible talks to leave and cleave. They haven't done that yet, and she hasn't been given away yet, so she's still under my covering. So there's some things that I want to have them established on financially that will propel them into being able to step into ministry, or being able to step into the areas that they are needing to go into eventually. And that's the thing that we're trying to do with the girls that we rescue, is we're working to get them on that solid same type of a footing, so that they have, when they meet a young man, they know what to look for. They know what kind of a godly young man am I looking for. What are the things, and they're prepared and they're ready to establish the next generation of young believers, and they're going to have an awesome testimony. So if we get their awesome testimony combined with that preparedness for marriage, preparedness for ministry, preparedness for all aspects of life, think about the dynamite that they can be when they step into that realm of life.
It's almost as if they're an arrow in a quiver that you can send out. Oh wait, God said that's what they are like, right? And that's the wonderful thing when you think about that generational faith. That's it, and we don't. Maybe we shouldn't go down this rabbit trail, because we'll end up there for at least 3 episodes. But I mean, you have to have a generational faith. If you don't have a generational faith, and that's the big problem within America today, is that we haven't had generational faiths. There was a generational gap. There was a breaking of the Christian generationalism. And people who didn't want to pass it on, they said, you know what, we feel like we want our children to see what's right, but to kind of really have a choice, to believe that you can really choose. And granted, we have moral free agency, we do choose.
Right.
But it's that idea of saying, instead of instructing them in what is right, just kind of hinting at what is right. No, parents, your job is to tell your children what's right. I will never forget being in a Sunday school class, and I mean, this is just, my belief in this statement has grown so much. I was a young guy, I think I was probably about 16, 17 in a Sunday school class, and we were going through a book by Vodi Bakum, What He Must Be If He Wants to Marry My Daughter, is the name of the book, or something to that effect. It's been a few years since I've read it, but great book if I remember correctly. And the Sunday school teacher, though, gets up and he tells a story of a conversation they had in that week. And somebody confronted him, was talking with him, and confronted him and said, "It sounds like you're brainwashing your children." And he goes and he says, "Well, if I'm not brainwashing them, who is?"
Who is?
Because, and I know we don't want to use that word brainwashing. That sounds terrible. I understand that. But just stop and think about it. If you're not influencing your child, then who is? Somebody else. Do you trust that other person to make that influence?
Well, we're to have our minds renewed and to with the washing of the water of the Word, the washing.
Yeah, I mean, we really should have our brain washed by God's Word. I mean, now, I understand the negative connotation of brainwashing. We shouldn't be mindless people. In fact, just yesterday, the reason my voice is a little bit in and out, probably, or a little weaker than normal, preached a few times yesterday, generally what I do on Sundays, and but one of the passages I preached on was in 4 different verses in Haggai. It mentions the word consider. One verse says it twice. And the first 2 times, I believe it's in chapter 1, verse 5, and chapter 1, verse 7, it says, consider your ways. Consider your ways. God doesn't want us to be mindless. He wants us to be thoughtful. He wants us to stop. He wants us to think. So we're not promoting a mindlessness when we're talking about a brainwashing. We're talking about a mind that is shaped and literally washed, cleansed by God's word.
Well, and the word says to take every thought captive.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
taking every thought captive, it means that you are thinking about the ramifications of your actions. You're thinking about the ramifications of the temptations that are thrown at you. You're thinking about the fool does not ponder his ways. A wise man ponders his ways. A wise man looks to the ant and considers her ways and studies her, and he looks at the way she's industrious. He looks at the way she prepares for winter. He looks at the ways that she is working together in unity, and every part supplying their unity. And really, the ant is a wonderful picture of the body of Christ. The ant is really a picture of that unity, the cohesion, all being of one mind, all being prepared for the coming winter.
And that hard work.
The hard work, the ethic, and all these things. And so, so there is a need for us to wash our minds. We have to consider our ways, and we have to think about what we're doing. We have to think about, okay, the ramifications of, if I do X, what's going to be the result of it? If I do Y, what's going to be the result of it? And that, going back to the generational thing, the Puritans really, the reason America was established as such a fantastic country, were we perfect? No. But really, we got off onto a fantastic foot. And the reason we got off onto a fantastic foot is because of the Puritans and the Pilgrims. And they thought generationally, and they instructed and taught their children, and their children taught their children, and their children taught their children. And so by the time we got to the Revolutionary War, they really had that solid foundational footing, and it carried us through hundreds of years until we got into the early 1900s, and you got into the World Wars, where we lost a lot of dads and a lot of fathers that were not there to pass on generational. And then
we had a string of progressive presidents through some unfortunate means. I think of like Woodrow Wilson, one of the most progressive presidents we've had. And Woodrow Wilson, was basically became president, with an incredibly low, I think one of the lowest percentage of the popular vote. And this is not a knock on the Electoral College. I believe wholeheartedly in the Electoral College.
Absolutely.
But it was one of those where it was an aberration, but then it set up a string of like 3 or 4 presidents in a row where they were just progressive. In fact, it was the progressive wing and the progressive party that Teddy Roosevelt ended up going and becoming a part of and founding and things like that. But before we jump into this, I do want to say one thing, because I think this is important. I'm going to just ask you to think back here just a few minutes. You had mentioned that one pastor had given $2,500. And he'd asked you, what's the best way to do this? Do you want me to buy product with it, or do you want me to just to donate it? Well, I think it's important to remind everybody the business model of Teshua here. It's, first of all, you buy directly from the girls. So it doesn't matter if any of the tea or any of the coffee sell. Ultimately it will matter, because you don't buy more until you run out. But the girls are being empowered up front. And that's, this is one of the things that when you're telling me about all this, just really drew me into this ministry. We hear that phrase, put your money where your mouth is. Well, Teshua puts its money where its mouth is. The girls are paid up front and empowered up front, which is a major deal, because one of the reasons why young ladies return to sex trafficking, or would return to sex trafficking after they're rescued out of it. What's if you can't pay the bills? You don't have any skills, can't pay the bills. Well, what do? Well, I go and I sell my body, because that's the only thing I know. And it's not just that, you're busting them out of brothels.
Right.
It's not just that then you're sharing the gospel with them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hey, wouldn't that be enough?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, that'd be enough. I mean, that's most ministries. That's where they stop, and I'm not knocking those ministries. Praise the Lord for those ministries.
Right.
But this one goes the extra mile.
Mm-hmm.
It goes in the home, teaches them schooling,
Mm-hmm.
skills, biblically counsels them,
Mm-hmm.
continues to share the gospel with them, because it's not like everybody gets saved the first time you hear the gospel.
Right.
Some people do, some people don't. But then this arm of it buys the product
Mm-hmm.
so that they're financially empowered. Then
Mm-hmm.
what happens? You sell the product,
Mm-hmm.
and 50% of it
Mm-hmm.
goes back to the ministry side of it, goes back to the home directly. And plus then it gives the option to, hey, you can donate, you can go around the whole business
Mm-hmm.
and still donate. And you don't get a dime from that.
Right.
And I'm not saying that in a complaining way. I'm
No.
just saying, like, look, this is great product.
Right.
I wouldn't be sitting here telling you that if I didn't believe it.
Right.
And yet it is ministry minded.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to say almost to a fault, because it's not almost to a fault. We should be ministry minded.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things where it's like, I mean, this is, oh, we're going to do ministry. I mean, it would be enough to say we just buy directly from the girls, financially empower them, and then take 100% of the profits for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how, and we would sit out here and be going, wow, what an incredible ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But no, then it donates back and gives a chance for you to donate directly without taking any of it. I mean, look, if you're going to spend a dime somewhere, Teshua is the way to do it.
Mm-hmm. You know, and that's the that has been and always will be the heart of it, because, you know, I could have said, send a portion of that to buy product, and that would have helped us out. I mean, that would have helped us, but that's not where.
Right, you don't get a dime of that $2,500 that was donated.
No,
and it doesn't help to go buy product, and it doesn't help to go do these other things. It goes directly only to
the rescue facility.
the rescue facility.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
and you're saying, hey, this is where you need to give that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, buying $2,500 worth of product, that'd have been pretty huge.
That would help us a lot. Right.
But I believe that you're going to listen to this, you're going to hear that, God's going to stir in your heart to go and buy some product, and you're going to love the product and go, as you're drinking it, about halfway through, you're going to go, oh, I forgot, this is saving girls from sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm. I do have to say something. You have actually, and I, as much as I bash on Charbucks for their inferior product, or what I consider inferior product, when I'm out on the road, I've always drank their cold brew coffee. Just because I needed some coffee, and I've gotten to the age where I'll drink hot coffee, but I really prefer just cold brew coffee. It has a lot less acidity to it. I get a lot less heartburn.
You drink as much caffeine as I have, it doesn't touch you very much. You need your tongue to be burned to wake up.
Maybe, but I drink, hot coffee gives me a lot more acid indigestion and a lot more, heartburn at night, and so I really just generally don't like a lot of hot coffee. I prefer cold brew because it's a lot less acidic and stuff. So I don't. But you know what? Every time I go to the gas station now, I look at the Starbucks and I'm like, dang it, I can't buy that because they support abortion.
Yep.
And so it just automatically registers, and I'm like, crap. All right, I'm gonna have to have hot coffee. Unless I can find Wide Awake, I think it's Wide Awake Coffee Company, but they're not usually in like the Pilots and Loves yet, and they're small enough that they're not in there yet and stuff. So I even do it to myself. I go, I can't support that company because of, because of what they support and stuff, and plus they don't support me. They're very adamantly against marriage and stuff, and they very much said, if you support Christian marriage, then we don't want your business.
Yeah, well, they're against marriage, and just there's only one kind of marriage, so they're against marriage. They're against the lives of the unborn, and on top of that, they're against Israel, and they're against they're against reality. They're for transgenderism.
Oh yeah.
Which is a mental illness or delusion, is maybe a better way to put that. But should we jump into this? Because see, the reason why my cup is full here, it's not because my mouth doesn't want it, but it's because my bladder is also full. So this might be a little shorter of an episode.
Okay.
I've done a lot of podcasting, and it's always kind of funny because every podcaster has to deal with this at one point in time or another. And when you're doing a podcast where you drink tea, it makes it 100 times harder.
Oh, man.
Should we start off here at the Escape from Tyranny, or do we want to go to the Chronicles one? We'll be able to get 2 episodes in this.
Yeah. So let's start here. We're here, so let's start here.
Okay. Escape from Tyranny, Pilgrims, Puritans, and Persecution. And David Barton, hats off to you. Alliteration right there. That was good. So, sorry. I'll get serious now. Persecution, well, we'll see if I get serious or not. But, persecution is nothing new. But coming into the late 16th century, the kings of Europe were in full attack mode, systematically annihilating those who dared to challenge their right to tyrannize and plunder all in the name of God. There was a titanic struggle between the forces of tyranny and those seeking liberty. Millions, yes, millions were dying in the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, in Germany. King Philip II was killing and torturing thousands under the Spanish Inquisition, forcing Protestants to convert to Catholicism. The Dutch, refusing to give up their religious liberty, led to a Protestant revolt in the Spanish Netherlands under William of Orange, but faced an all-out siege and near starvation and brought them to the brink of extinction in the process. In France, they were butchering French Huguenots by the tens of thousands. Now, I want to stop here because this is a great place to pick up for American history, but there is something that happened 68 years before the 38-year war, and that was the Magdeburg Confession in Germany. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of it, but I don't remember.
Yeah, so it was in 1550 and this is the same thing, was the start of this happening, where Catholicism came into power, and they came against Germany, specifically, of course, it's Lutheran, okay, that's who they are, and they say you have to become Catholic. You have to abandon the Lutheran Church, you have to become Catholic. And this is what you have to do, and it was a civil ordinance, okay? Or civil mandate, civil law, we could say. I hate to use the word law because it wasn't lawful.
Right.
But they came in and they said this, and the pastors of Magdeburg, Germany came together and they wrote this confession. And it is a confession. You can find it, I believe the website is defytyrants.com, great website name. And put out by Matt Truella, or was translated, he put this out. Another book that I would recommend you buying is, and reading, short book, both of these are, is The Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates.
Yeah.
And this was really, in 1550, the Magdeburg Confession was, I don't want to say the first put together written document of the Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates, because you got it in Acts chapter 5 too.
Right.
But this was really, the pastors came together and they wrote a confession as to why the civil government can't do this. And one of the arguments that they gave was, and we talked about this just a little bit, where a patriarchy, but not an authoritarian patriarchy. They gave the example of, if a husband were to go and to take his wife and daughters and say, you have to become a prostitute, they said the daughters and wife would be under no obligation to obey that because it goes against the laws of God. It's a delegated authority. And they laid that groundwork to be a delegated authority as to what needs to be obeyed. And that's what this doctrine, this confession, was based upon, this Magdeburg thing. But this is the same problem that's happening. I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background, that it didn't start in 1618, and I don't think that's what David Barton's saying here. But it's one of the effect that as I see in the page that we're about to read. He gets into that a little bit, that it was before this. But it's important to realize here that there were those who stood up against this, but now this is really coming, this persecution is coming to the pinnacle moment in all of this. But it continues on, and it says, England largely had been the backwater of Europe for several centuries. Its people were, for the most part, ignorant, poor, illiterate peasants, with its kings and queens controlling their life. Yet in the 1560s and the 1570s, a light shone in the darkness. After long years of the Bible having been banned in England, under the threat of being burned at the stake for ownership of a smuggled copy, the Bible had now been printed in English and put into every church. Preachers inspired and inflamed by the Reformation traveled through the land preaching directly from the Bible, and like a flame to fresh tinder, it caught fire. Individuals had their sins and their ignorance revealed to them by the Word of God. The Reform had come to the British Isles. For the first time ever, the Bible was made available so the people could read it for themselves, and it became even more precious than ever. Precious than their lives. This was God speaking to them. A grassroots freedom movement had been born, like no other in history, then or since the beginning, in British homes through the matchstick of liberty, the newly published Geneva Bible. Well, what do you think about that? Because, this podcast is Liberty Unveiled. Can you really have liberty outside of God's Word?
No, and I think that's why this all ties together really well. Is as I often say, the source of the freedom that the girls are experiencing is the same source of freedom that inspired and raised up America, and it's the only source of freedom that is going to restore America and bring us back to our moorings and to our foundation. And it really is the Bible. And if you look at in the Old Testament, when there were several times where the Israelites had the Word of God, they had been going along and they'd been doing good, and then they'd start getting into more sin and more sin and more sin and more sin and more sin, and then it'd become absolutely reprobate, apostate, heathen, just vile, wicked Molech worshippers, and they would just go down the rabbit hole. And then all of a sudden somebody would come along and they would find the scriptures and they would have a public reading of it, and you would see these times where all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've completely lost our moorings here. We have completely we're done in, because we've woe is us, because we're wicked people. We have gone the wrong way here. And they would see their sin and it would convict them, and you would see this national revival break out, and then they would go and years would pass by and they'd go down the same rabbit hole again. And so America is at the point where we have to come back to this foundational document, these foundational understandings of truth. Just like the girls have to experience that personally, we as a nation have to understand it and experience it nationally. And they're really, we've had so much, Pastor Kerry talks about how we've had so much of an emphasis on personal salvation and personal relationship, but really, it really has to be a church relationship, a church understanding. The Bible talks multiple times about forsake not the assembly of yourselves together. Every joint supplying, we all have to work together. And that's where, if you come back to the ant and in the considering the ant, they all work together. And so if we as a nation will begin to work together and come back to our moorings, we would see our nation turn around.
We would. And I think this is, just really important to look at, because you touched on something that is going to be uncomfortable for people to hear. But it's right. And we need to touch on things that are uncomfortable. No one's ever been saved without a confrontation of the cross. Salvation is personal in the fact that you have to personally accept Jesus. But God doesn't just speak of us as individuals. And in fact, this is something that I find fascinating. Even those who completely have a non-biblical worldview understand this principle. We're more than just individuals. Alone, we can't make it. Alone, we can't do it.
Right.
And it talks about in, I think it's Psalm 9, around verse 17, that the nation that forgets God, God will throw that nation into hell. Now, that's not saying every person in that nation. That's not what it's saying. But it is that idea that he's going to remove that nation, and he is going to destroy that nation, and that most of the citizens of that nation, because of their sin and because they didn't remember God, they didn't know God, they will also be cast into hell. There will be, of course, a remnant that's saved in a lot of cases. But right now, America has forgotten God. And that's a problem.
It's a big problem.
Because God tells us where that leads. And most people in America today, I mean, broadest path that leads to destruction, many travel it. Narrow is the way that leads to life, few there find it. Are on their way.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to do this to us, but do you have any closing thoughts?
No, we'll pick up here next time. Obviously like and subscribe and share and come onto the website. It's I made it really easy because I know not a lot of people know how to spell Teshua. It's actually spelled just like Yeshua, except with a T instead of a Y. But you can also go to deliverance-t.com. So deliverance-t.com or teshuat.com, TESHUAH-TEA.com, and stop by and buy some of the products and stuff, and that helps us reorder more products from the girls and or more products from our friends down in Thailand. So anyway, so like and subscribe and share and leave comments. I really appreciate them. And so we'll close there for today, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Liberty Unveiled podcast, setting captives free one episode at a time. The Liberty Unveiled podcast is a part of the Unresolved Podcast Network and has been brought to you by Teshua Tea Company, TESHUAHTEA.com or deliverance-t.com.